Hey, everybody. Please welcome Aden Young. Poor Aden had to watch that last scene standing right there, so I think he's still recovering from that a little bit.
It sends you blind. Well, just thank God it wasn't theater.
I said it was the ultimate icebreaker. So we'll jump right into it. We spoke yesterday, so nice to see you again. You have a very interesting background pedigree in terms of your sort of provenance, as they say. Where are you from, and how did you end up in Australia?
Well, I grew up my father was from Missouri, my mother was from Australia, and they met in Toronto, and I grew up there. And we moved out to Australia when I was about 9 or 10, and you know, I wanted to become an actor when I was probably about 15, 16. So, and the strange thing was, you know, there was a lot of, I guess, harassment from school kids, like I was the dumb Yank or the dumb Canadian or whatever. And so, you know, I really wanted to hold on to my accent, you know. And when I realized I wanted to become an actor, of course, there weren't going to be that many roles for Canadians, except maybe the tourists walking through town and get sick and what have you. And so I started learning my Australian accent, and there you go, and job's right. Of course, pretty, you know, tough characters. So it's actually very difficult for me to play an Australian lawyer. You know, I always end up talking like that, you know. But
You do it very well, though.
thank you. But the first job I ever got was working back in Canada, believe it or not, playing a Canadian. So it was bizarre in the end.
And did you study acting as a teenager, or how did you sort of get into it that way?
Well, you know, excuse me, I chased a girl to drama school. I wasn't interested in drama. I was interested in her, and she was going to be there for 4 hours one Saturday, and the first hour was music, and the second hour was dance, and that was it. I wanted to get out of there. It wasn't for me. I was a bit of a jock, and I got lost leaving the theater or leaving the complex, and I found myself in the theater, and I couldn't believe it. It was like a cathedral. It just, you know, it was like the first time I'd ever had any sort of sense of spirituality. And there was a man sweeping the stage. His name was Neville. He had a glass eye, and I just thought to myself, what's that story? And what's going on here? What's so you can build a world and you can tell a story, and my God, that's what I want to do. I want to be in that world. And that was it. From that moment on, I gave up rugby the next day. I gave up hockey. I gave everything up. I just, you know, I started smoking unfiltered Camel cigarettes and hanging out at theaters and doing the bohemian flyman dream. And then I was going to amateur drama school, ATYP, Australian Theatre for Young People. And I got my first play there, and you know, and then I was doing Romeo and Juliet when I got my first film, and I said no to my first film, which was ludicrous. It was a Bruce Beresford film, lead role, and you know, but I was Romeo. You know, I was in love with Josephine, so, you know, and so they fired me. You know, they said we're not going to let you play Romeo. You know, you gotta do the film. This is what your life's about now. So off I went to do the film, and luckily I didn't stop working, you know, for a long time.
So did you envision yourself more as a film actor, or you didn't necessarily have a format in mind of how you wanted to perform?
Well, I wanted to be a theater actor. I wanted to be an actor. You know, I wanted to be the best actor on earth. I mean, every young actor wants to be the best actor on earth, but as I started to learn about film, I started to understand the language of the composition and the language of cinema, and I started to research, and also started to work with some extraordinary filmmakers. You know, filmmakers who exposed me to French cinema, Iranian cinema, Japanese cinema, and so where had been this, what I thought was film, was really just the movies, and suddenly now it was a landscape that, you know, you'd go into this box, and one of these windows would, you know, the window would come alive, and you would be in the mindset or the psychology of an Iranian man or what have you, and it was a great awakening. And so from that point I wanted to learn the language as well as I could, you know, and I started writing, and I started directing, and I taught myself how to edit, and I just immersed myself in the technical aspect of it. I actually even studied to be a focus puller at one stage to understand the dynamics of lens shift, you know, with a zoom lens. And, you know, I really desperately wanted to know every single syllable of that language.
Well, I think that everyone would agree that's very smart. So we'll sort of jump a little bit to how you learned to rectify, how you first got the script. What was that process like?
Well, I was shooting a film. You know, often in Australia we get sent pilot scripts, and you know, look, a lot of Australians, they love that time of year because it's like, you know, if you get one of these, you win the lottery. You know, in Australia you work as an actor, then you work as a waiter after work. You know, you don't really make a living. You can't make a living, so you have to diversify. And but for me, I was always employed within the film business. There was always things that I was doing as a filmmaker, as an editor as well. So I never felt the need to have to secure my existence with a TV show in the States, and I didn't want to uproot very much. So I'd always turn down the pilot situation, and you know, there were a lot of Australian directors trying to get me over to do something, and I just didn't want to sign that contract that says, you know, you sign your life away into perpetuity, you know, throughout the universe. And that's amazing, that contract, by the way. But Rectify came along, and it came at a point where I was interested in doing my own projects. But to cut a long story short, it did tick all the boxes. It was a short run. It was a very creative script. It was a creative channel. It was a creative force behind it.
And very filmmaking oriented too.
And it was very cinematic, you know, that it had a breath to it that you could read on the page, and I felt that I could bring a certain language to that, you know. I worry a little bit with television that, you know, it's a bit like theater. When I did my first professional play, I remember asking one of the actors, you know, is it big enough? You know, he said, "Oh, you'll be fine. You'll be fine." You know, there are moments where you might have to, "Oh, yes," you know. But you know, it was a bit like that with TV as well. I thought, well, you know, it's generally a lot of it's in coverage, and you know, so I felt that this had a certain cinematic language that I wouldn't be out of my depth in. So
Right.
yeah.
And obviously the show is all Ray McKinnon. It's his vision. It's his tone. It's his southern sort of ambiance. How did you two connect on that level? Because it sounded like he kind of knew he wanted you right away.
Well, I think, you know, Ray had gone through a period where he was trying to get it up, and then he put it aside for a while, and he had a friend of his involved who was going to play Daniel, and then the project fell over, and then when it was restarted, he started the search again because that friend was unavailable, and during the search, he started to, in some ways, play Daniel, you know, in order to find the other characters and what have you. And what was extraordinary is when I met him, and when he realized he was going to give me the role, he was farewelling Daniel. You know, he was letting him go, and you could see that sort of terrible poignancy of him knowing that I'll never get to play Daniel again. You know, but I did do him the honor of when I met him in New York for the final reading. You know, I was shooting in Thailand, and they called me. I had 3 days that I could get to. I had to get to Toronto to get a passport fixed up so I could get into New York, so I could do the test, get back on a flight, and be back in Bangkok, shoot straight off the plane. So I landed in New York, and I didn't know what to expect. I was jet lagged, and this big bear of a man came over and said, "Hey, how you doing?" And
It's pretty good, actually.
We talked for about an hour about the role, and then I realized my shirt was wrong for Daniel, and I needed to wear his shirt. And so he gave me his shirt, and in some ways at that point he sort of farewelled Daniel. But it was very interesting. Just before we were about to do the take, he said, "Now I want you to do it, go ahead and do it exactly how I said, or do it any way you'd like to."
That's either great or terrible.
It was like that every day.
I think actually a lot of people in this room would dream of a boss like that.
Well, Ray inspired such confidence in me. You know, I'm not going to say a bad word about my upbringing in film in Australia, but it is very categorized that you're an actor. Stand there and say what, you know, in so many ways. And when I came and worked for the people behind Rectify, it was a very different situation. It was, so you've been working for 22 years in this business. What do you know? We'd like to use your knowledge. And it was such a welcoming embrace that I didn't want to go home. You know, I wanted to work here for the rest of my life. You know, I didn't want to take American jobs, but you know. My dad was American.
Well, it's hard to imagine the show kind of anywhere else but Sundance because all those elements don't necessarily exist, let's say, in broadcast television. Nothing against broadcast, but you have a lot more bosses, a lot more masters to answer to, and just this kind of show wouldn't really exist in that context.
I think, you know, when you look at the networks and the fact that they're owned by corporations that we've never heard of, that sound like Zing Dong or something, you know, they are interested in the dollar. And so stories begin to be about market research and about, you know, how can we best define this through this story and also the sale of these items and the sponsorship of these particular, you know, lifestyles and what have you. And unfortunately, you end up with something that's in so many ways directed by a committee. Sometimes it works magnificently and it hits the zeitgeist, and other times, though, you sense that when you turn into that show, when you tune in, you're watching a mall. You know, you're watching a shopping experience, and I think there's enough shopping channels already. You know, and so with Rectify, it felt like Sundance was saying, well, perhaps let's echo the work of somebody like Dennis Potter. Let's get back to the reality that it is a medium for art and entertainment at the same time. It's a medium for creative discussion about who we are as an organism, you know, and who we are as a condition of people. So it was very exciting in that way, yeah. And
very fortunate, too. A lot of actors don't get that opportunity.
No.
So playing Daniel, obviously very daunting, I imagine. Sort of playing a man who's facing the worst possible scenario any human could face, but then he ends up not facing it, which we've talked about as kind of almost worse than facing what he thought he was going to face. And how did you immerse yourself in that psychology? Because I can't imagine there being kind of a more dramatic mind shift in terms of preparing.
To be honest, I was so jet lagged, you know.
Maybe that helped.
Maybe that's what it was. I just had constant jet lag. I mean, you know, Daniel was somebody who needed. The subject of capital punishment in the world globally is very controversial, and you know, it includes real souls, you know, and in that system, people get, you know, they get caught in the net when they shouldn't have. And so that, when you look at the possibility that maybe Daniel is innocent of this crime, it started to weigh on me emotionally, what would happen. And I almost felt like, here's, you know, that Daniel was like a sailor on the Kursk, you know, he was just down there with there was no future for him. He knew that his era was running out and his time was running out. And so I felt that he would be somebody who would have retreated so far from what he knew of himself and of his emotion that all that would be left would be this pure, raw figure. Angle, you've got the, you know, the revenge angle, you've got the, you know, the family story, and then you have Daniel's inability to communicate through all of that. And so when I finished, I went back home, and I remember my wife, she called and said, where are you? I said, oh, I'm in the city. I said, you never go to the city. What are you doing there? I said, I have no idea. I'm standing on a corner. I said, what are you doing? I said, I don't know. How long have you been in town? About 4 hours now. And I'd been standing on the street corner, just watching people. But in this sort of stupor of Daniel, of just, God, I just came back from Georgia, and this is all so different, and it's all so sad, and it's all so rushed, and it's all so broken.
You really needed a beer at that point.
And I'm thinking, but I'm consciously aware that I've got 2 beautiful children. I've just done this magnificent show. You know, my family life is good. I've been paid for the first time in my life, you know, and I'm really sad. It was just bizarre. It was
in a good way, though, probably joyful and.
Well,
maybe...
it was, you know, no, I really had to get rid of him, and a friend came over, and he wanted to show me a film that he'd dedicated to me because I told him that the film was garbage and he'd never make it. So he came over and showed me the film, and later on that night we drank a bit too much, and he said, "You need to come with me." I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I don't know. We're going to go away tomorrow." And we went. And it was 2 days, and I came back, and I was human again. I felt like I just, oh, geez, oh, it was just a show. That's right, yeah. And then they called to say, "Oh, we got, we're going to do
10 more
season 2.
episodes.
Great.
Right.
Brilliant.
The ultimate be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah.
I was looking through
Horrifying.
some of the pre-questions. This is a good sort of nuts and bolts question for actors here. How did you get your first agent?
I paid $20. Her name was Penny Williams. She was
In Australia?
spectacular. She was the head of that theater, the cathedral that I'd been in. And I paid $20, and she said, "Well, we have to get a headshot." And so I went out and I paid $80 for a headshot. And I just forked out money for the first, 6 weeks. I love the headshots. They're just brilliant. They're just brilliant.
We can probably find them online somewhere.
No, don't you dare. But yeah, that was
Is that
it,
like a
yeah.
typical Australian mode of getting an agent?
We were,
Okay.
I know that I'm still a member of an extras
Union?
or something, because I took my headshot. She couldn't get me any work, so I took my headshot. I said, well, at least I could be an extra. So I'm sure I'll get a phone call in a couple of days. We need a Southern guy. Well, I don't think I can do it. Yeah.
And here's another question. Do you have any daily routines when you're shooting? Is there any sort of ceremonial habit you have when you first wake up?
Well, do I? I don't know. I mean, I have 2 cups of coffee. No, not really. I don't do anything.
It probably depends what you're shooting that day, maybe.
No.
No?
No, I don't do anything. Go to the bathroom.
You make it seem so easy.
No, I don't. No.
There is no answer there.
Well, there's an answer. No.
No, that's a great answer.
Short, yeah.
Perfect. We have time for a couple questions from the group. We'll start with you.
I was curious, were you able to make really definitive choices? You talked a lot about the ambiguity of guilt versus innocence. It's likely somewhere in between, and you had Ray as a resource, but how far back building a real solid history without getting in too deep or getting in over your head where an episode comes and it just conflicts with that?
And I'll rephrase
that's
for
a great
we're
point.
taping this
I
real
mean-
quick. I'm just going to rephrase it.
Okay.
He asked, how far did Aden go back to create a history for Daniel without revealing too much?
You make a real choice. Is he guilty or is he innocent?
Is he guilty or innocent? Did you know this?
I think that's a brilliant question, because the question really asks, how much do you want to invest in a particular projection when you don't know what's coming? We didn't know what episode 2 was going to bring when we were doing I think we'd read episode 2. Midway through episode 2, episode 3 arrives, and you go, so there's a constant, right. But there was a certain discussion that Ray and I had about I'll take you through, I'll act it out, what I said to Ray, I said, are you going to tell me if he's guilty or innocent? And he says, well, would you like to know? Not yes, or yes, he's guilty, no, he's not. He said, would you like to know? And that threw me in a curveball, and I went away and I thought about that. And, I had to look at the reality of malleable memory, of what happened on that evening. Were there drugs involved? And looking at, a little bit of who he was at that time in his life. And so I sort of asked Ray about that and had an idea of him as a youngster and him growing up and so forth. And then I looked at the opposite and said, well, if he isn't guilty, then he's been in this box for all these years, and that's as heartbreaking as the other way, So either which way, it's going to be a terrible study of loss, because if he is responsible for this murder, then there's a monster on the loose. And if he isn't, then he certainly knows that he is responsible for every turn that he made with that girl's future in mind, whether it was even just a simple invitation to a lunch that led to this, that led to a phone call, that led to the invitation to go to the river that fucking night, you know. And he's going to go through those memories because he's got 23 hours a day to think on them for, you know, nearly 20 years. But the question of how much did I know of who he was, I had to leave some of that open because, like television, you know, some of it just, it throws you a curveball and you go. But what I was more interested in a way, was looking at the environment of death row and how that would have changed him, what sort of neighborhood that was. And in some ways, it left me on a street corner. It left me with information trauma, you know, finding out about that neighborhood, finding out about the reality of that world, and the fact that it isn't peopled with innocent men. It's not peopled with, you know, people you'd shake hands with. You know, these are monsters in there, and for the majority. And that woke me up to that side of the human condition and the possibilities of what this organism is capable of, in the name of God, even sometimes. So I went with that as a landscape to any sort of sinister behavior on Daniel's part. I felt he would have been conditioned that way through that experience, rather than a previous experience of being somebody who preyed on Hannah in a sexual way. I felt that there was enough language to be gained from that experience of death row that I could at least touch on the possibility.
You brought it out and killed it in that golf course scene.
What's that?
In that golf course scene, that was a really
You were great in the golf course scene.
Yeah, it actually, you know, believe it or not, is a great actor's trick, I think. You know, when I'm doing that scene, when I lean into him and I say, and then shit you out like you're nothing, it's, if you look at it again, buy the DVD. It's the sun. It isn't me. It's the sun just glints in the eye, and you go, ooh, my mother, oh boy. You know, talk about the last scene, you know, but when my mother saw that, she was, I don't want to talk to you. You know? So, yeah.
Probably just one more question, sir, on the end.
For being here, I really enjoyed watching. I was wondering, you portray such a unique character. You come across disconnected and connected at the same time. And I was wondering, when you're actually shooting a scene, you talk about how you shape the character, but when you're actually in the scene shooting it, what is your process, your thought process, or technique that you use to kind of stay so small in your choices and unique?
He said Aden maintains being connected and disconnected at the same time, and how does he stay focused on making small choices in that moment?
I think it's a great question, because it is a question, it is a world of technique. You know, you've got the focus to think about, you've got the frame to think about, and, you know, it's something that I really wanted to understand, and I spent years studying what the psychological effect of a close-up is, as opposed to a wide shot, what the height of the camera means, what the refraction of the lens can do to the way you're experiencing the moment, and so forth, and you try to learn it as a language. I guess in some ways it's best to sort of use a metaphor. I did a film once where I was dealing with a special forces, you know, group, and you know, I'd grown up thinking that these guys were all like Jet Li and, you know, what have you, and I said to this guy, I said, so, you know, maybe you could show me some of your moves, and he says, well, we've only got 6. It's just that we do them all the time, you know, that's it. I said, can you show me? No. If he's got a gun, take it off him and shoot him. If he doesn't, kill him. If he won't give you the gun, run. You know, so it becomes, you want it to become something of a second-hand language, but of course it doesn't. And of course you fail, because, you know, for whatever reason, you have a crisis. And you start thinking about the focus, and you start thinking about, you know, and you know, there's a sequence in the season where I made the worst choice, And I came out and I had the machine guns blaring and it, the cacophony ceased, and I was suddenly left alone with my own embarrassment. It was horrible. I just thought I didn't connect, I didn't feel, this was just, I literally reached into the bag and gone 27B, a stash of 14A, a bit of that, and I'd ended up with bullshit, and I think that when you're telling a story, we have to measure, especially when we're talking about something like this that is within such a debate in America at the moment. And I think to pay it a certain homage, you have to measure that fiction against its reality. And for me to go out there and start bullshitting about this was to say to Damien Eccles, well, who cares, buddy? So...
You have to tell the Damien story.
Well, we had a lovely, and perhaps the most touching...
Damien's one of the West Memphis 3 released prisoners.
We had perhaps the most touching compliment that, at least that I could have, was Damien saying that he didn't want to watch the show after episode 1 because to him it was a rerun, and still gets me. Anyway, but in that circumstance, though, you sort of find yourself going, well, what do I do now? I've tried that. I've made a fool of myself, even though I'm sure that people are going, well, that was really okay, but... And so you have to then start stripping, and that's really hard because you feel ashamed or you feel whatever. You just feel out of place to that truth, and it took a while. That was the really only moment in the whole show where my experience came from the worst part of my experience, the ego. It came from my ego as opposed to what is the story, what is it, what is the intention, who are you, am I not listening? I obviously wasn't listening. I was just, hey, look at me. And that's frightening, but it happens. We're all human, and we all think, well, this is going to be my great little moment, and on the Oscar clip, and what garbage. It's terrible, terrible. So getting back to the truth of it allows you. It's bizarre. It's almost as though you suddenly have tunnel vision, and the focus goes away. The idea of where you have to stand. You don't think about the frame. You don't think about anything. You look right at that girl, and in the girl you see this soul, and in the soul you see this possibility, and then cut. And what? Oh, you did it. You got there. Hopefully, So, but it's a good question.
Very good. You guys got a little mini master class in acting today. Thank you so much.